Hey everybody, hopefully you can hear me and see me and stuff. Is this working? Haven't done a whole lot with YouTube. Not sure how this whole streaming setup's gonna work, but hopefully it's doing something. Um, say something in the chat if you can hear me. Yes, it will be recorded. Assuming YouTube records it, it should record it, and then it should be available at the same link. All right, cool, all good, great. All right, well, welcome everyone. So today I was thinking we could talk a bit about React Context versus Redux and kind of the differences and similarities between the two. And I've made a little app that kind of like uses context and Redux and neither of them, so like regular props and state. And we can walk through kind of how that works and maybe some of the differences and sort of pitfalls of the approaches. So let me jump over to my screen here and hopefully y'all can see that. So I made this little app that is pretty much the same app in 3 different approaches. And there's this little kind of demo thing that runs the whole thing. So we have buttons that we can switch between the props and state version, one with context and one with Redux. They look pretty much the same. So let's drill into one of these components and see what it's doing. So props and state. So each of these there's like a component called room that's rendering either a white background or a dark background, depending on whether the light is on or not. And you can click these buttons and it'll flip the light on and off. And in the regular React case, we've got this. So this is like just plain old props and state. We're using hooks. There's useState for maintaining state. But there's no context, there's no Redux or anything. So all we have is like a single piece of state here that has 3 items in an array. So this is like true for light is on and false for light is off. And we've got this flip light function that will just kind of toggle a specific light on or off. So the way we're rendering the rooms, we're just mapping over 3 numbers and rendering out each one with its own index. So each of these are like 0, 1, and 2 correspond to indexes in this array. And when you click flip, it's toggling that flag, and then it's re-rendering. Priya, yeah, it should be available afterwards. I think if all goes well, YouTube will record it, and it should be available at this same link. So if I open up the console, let me clear this out. Maybe make it smaller here. So in the props and state version, if I click on one of these flip buttons, so like room 0 has flipped, but it re-rendered all 3 rooms. And this is true for all of them. So if any one of these, if I change one of them, it's going to re-render everything. And this is how React works, because we're when you click that button, it's calling flip light, which is going to call set lights, right, which is the state setter, and that's going to re-render this app component. React is going to call the component again, and it's going to re-render all of the rooms, just cause. So like any one of them can trigger all 3 being re-rendered. So let's look at, is this making sense so far? Anyone have any questions about this example? I feel like there's a bit of a delay between the video and the chat, so if you do have questions, drop them in the chat and I can get to them in a minute. So let's look at another example using context. So our app here is rendering this props and state. There's a context version and there's the Redux version. So let's go into context. And all of these there's just like a exported default component at the bottom called root. That renders the thing out. In the description for this video, there's a link to this example in a code sandbox, so you can check it out yourself if you want. So yeah, if we have time, we'll look at how to like optimize these things. Because the optimization is kind of is one of the big tripping points. Because Redux does a lot of that stuff for you. So this one's using context. And if you're not familiar with React context, the way you use it is call this react.createContext function. It returns a context object. This thing has two properties in it. There's a provider and a consumer. So what you actually get is like room context.provider and room context.consumer. And these things are like a matched pair. So like whatever you put into the provider can come out the consumer side, or you can use the useContext hook and pass in the entire context to get the same thing that you would from the consumer. So, so what we're doing here is we've got a component called room provider. Doesn't have to be called this. I could have called it like room store or something. But this is the component that's managing all the state. So where in the React example, we just had, let me open up Props and State again. Where in this one, we just had this app component that holds the state and renders the rooms. For context, we've got a kind of a top level provider component that holds the state and provides those values and the function to change the values through to its children. So we've got this room context provider. We pass in a value. And so what context does is it makes this value available to everything underneath it. So any child components here and like children of those children and on down the tree, all of those things will be able to access this value. So we're passing in this value object. If you've used context before, this might look like a red flag to you. If you haven't, so the trick with context is that it re-renders everything underneath. Well, it re-renders all of its consumers anytime this value changes. And the way this is working right now, anytime this room provider renders, this value object is gonna be recreated, and it's a new value, right? Even if the contents are the same, it's going to be a new object and it's going to re-render those consumers. So jump on down here. So we've got our app component is rendering here, right? So we've got the room provider is like pulled up a level, and it's kind of just to sort of, this is sort of a contrived example. I think I'm sort of trying to simulate the having data like higher up in the app somewhere and then passing it down. And even though it's going like one level down here, it's not a big deal. But you can imagine if you had like a larger app tree, the same kind of same idea would work. You've got the provider at the top level, wrapping your app, wrapping whatever components you want to have that data. And so app can get the data, and so can room, because room is rendered inside app. So here we're just like hard coding like 3 rooms, index 0, index 1, index 2. And those room components use that useContext hook to get that value out of the provider. And then it's kind of doing the same thing. It's rendering out whether it's light or dark, depending on the values in that array. So it's sort of the same pattern. We've got an array of 3 values. And if I click on context, yep, false, true, false. And so this also, anytime we change one of these, is going to re-render everything. Let me clear that out again. If I flip one room, we get all 3 rendering. Right? Even though you'd think like, if I change room 2, only room 2 should have to re-render, but it re-renders the other ones too. And this is sort of the tripping point with context. I think you can optimize this manually, and I think we'll have time to do that. But let's look at the Redux one, and we can see how it doesn't have this problem out of the box. So if we click over to our Redux example, looks nearly identical, but this one, if you flip one of the rooms, it only renders that room. And so let's look at how this one's working. So if you aren't familiar with Redux, what we've got is we're creating a store. And I'm using the new Redux starter kit. This is a package that just went into, it's been out a while, but it just became 1.0, I think like a week or so ago. And Redux starter kit gives you some nice functions to sort of cut down on the Redux boilerplate a bit. So we're calling configure store, which is a function that comes with this Redux starter kit. And we pass it an object to like configure the store. And one of the keys is a reducer. So instead of writing that reducer normally with like sort of, I don't know, classic Redux, I guess, we would just write a reducer function. But Redux starter kit gives us this create slice function. So this kind of like packages up a reducer and it creates the actions at the same time, and initial state and stuff. So it's pretty cool. So we have this reducer's object, and every key in this object is like its own action. So we'll have an action called flip light. And this is like the reducer function for that single action. So when we dispatch a flip light, it's going to do this thing here, which is like just toggling the state. So this create slice thing returns those actions in an object. We're destructuring that here into just to grab the flip light action creator, I guess, and the reducer. And so for actually rendering the component, we've got this room here again. But this time we've wrapped it in this connect function, and this comes from React Redux. This is how you connect a React component to the data in the Redux store, and you pass it a map state to props function and a map dispatch to props function. Here just called map state map dispatch, and this decides like it gets the entire state and it pulls out pieces of it and passes them into your component as props. So here we are we're rendering the rooms down here with that index, right? So each one is going to be like 0, 1, or 2. And map state can look at that prop, that index prop, and just like pull out the right value and pass it in as is lit. So the component doesn't have to know, doesn't have to worry so much about its index, although it does for printing purposes. And we've got map dispatch that passes in that flip light action creator. And yeah, the rest of it kind of works the same way. So the difference with this, the reason why these components don't have to re-render, or the reason why they don't all re-render, is because it's wrapped in connect. This connect function has some optimizations to, it'll call map state. And if map state returns the same values as last time, it says, well, I don't need to re-render this thing. So it's going to call map state every time. And I think if we could throw a return in here and try putting in a console log just to see map state, and I'll write out like props.index. That's that number. Let's see what this does. I think we'll see. I figured we would see. Oh, click on Redux. There we go. So, so it's printing out map state 0, and then it renders it. Map state 1 renders it, and so on. And let me clear that out, and I'll toggle like room 1. And you can see it calls map state for all 3. But since the other rooms haven't changed, Redux knows like, okay, I don't have to keep going. Well, I'll just stop here. Won't render this component. But room 1 has changed, so it does re-render that one. So that's what's going on with Redux. It's got this connect is giving you this optimization out of the box that will only re-render when really like the injected props are going to be changing. And this is nice. So we can do the same kind of thing with Context and React. You just have to do it manually. How's so let me pause for questions. Anyone have questions so far? Like this is maybe a lot of stuff, especially the Redux bits, but drop questions in the chat if you got them. So let's see how we could optimize the React, the plain React version of this thing. Reselect is actually built into, I think Reselect is built in to Redux Starter Kit too. I've got a blog post on Reselect. I wasn't going to get into too much of the other like non-Reduxy core stuff today, but check out, I think I have a blog post called like something about Redux selectors. Go to all posts and search for selectors. So yeah, so let's look at how to do this optimizing prop state thing. So this one, anytime you change one of these values, it's going to re-render the component. Like it's going to re-render all three of them because it has to, right? Like use state or calling set lights, I guess, is going to re-render this thing. But we can optimize the individual room components here to like only re-render when their props change. And if we hop up to here, we can wrap this in a React.memo. And React Memo takes a component and then returns a new component that's like optimized to only re-render when one of its props changes. And I think that might be enough. Depends on this flip light function. Let's try it. So on props and state, if I flip a room, nope, we're still getting all three. Cool. So I think what's going on there is because, yeah, so this flip light function gets recreated every time. So this is a new function, which means that this prop, this flip light prop is changing. And if as long as that's changing, it's going to re-render. So we can optimize this. Well, we have to call, we can wrap it in a use callback, but we need to pass in the index somehow. So that's a little annoying. Because we could like wrap this in a use callback, which would help a little bit, but it wouldn't actually solve this problem because we're creating a function right here. What else could we do? What else could we do? We could make like flip light functions for every room. I don't know. Yeah, so it gets kind of, this gets messy. What we need to be able to do is pass a function here. Right, flip light 1, flip light 2, whatever. We need like an array of functions, and it's kind of messy. It's kind of messy. Let's come back to this one. Let's look at the context one. I think the context one might be easier to optimize. Maybe not. But so yeah, this one's a little easier because we're not passing down an arrow function. So, but again though, we're recreating this function every time. And here we can optimize this by wrapping it in use callback. So we can import the use callback hook. And if we wrap this thing, yeah, bind it with index. Well, so binding, if we call bind inside here, that's bind creates a new function as well. That wouldn't work. Like we can try that. I think it's going to do the same thing though. Bind, no this, index. Yeah, it's still going to re-render everything. So really we need to like, I don't know, create like an array of flipper functions or something. This is messy. Yeah, this actually might work. I guess like you could do this, right? Like this is a flip light 0 and then flip light 1, flip light 2 or something. You could optimize this with like you could use a loop, I guess, instead of manually hard coding all this. But and then you can pass in like flippers based on that index. And this should be like one step in the right direction. It's not going to fix it yet because these are being recreated every time. But this gets us closer. So we can wrap these and use callback. And like, this is sort of awful, but let me try this. I feel like it might work. And we only want to recreate these when, well, nothing changes, I guess. So use callback takes the second argument, which is it's like a dependency array. And whenever something in this array changes, we should regenerate the callback. And in this case, we never need to, because flip light is, well, actually, hold on. Flip light can change. We're going to fix that in a second, but that is its only dependency. And we can also call back this one. And this should only change when set lights changes. This one will never change. So we can pass empty here. And then we're getting closer, and we need to use callback. But this, you can see how this gets, well, it's kind of a pain. I think it's still going to re-render every time. Oh, hey, no, it's better. Cool. Oh yeah, because we have our memo, right? I already did the use memo. Yeah, cool. A React memo. Yeah, cool. All right, so this one's optimized then, right? So we're only re-rendering the ones that have changed because of all this mess with the callbacks. But prop stuff, flip light. Yeah, so that's the other that's the better fix. Yeah, that's what I should have done. If you pass down the function itself and have the room, yep, I like that a lot better. Let's do that. We pass down flip light, which is not gonna change because it's wrapped in use callback and it depends on nothing. And then we just change the way room works because it already has its index. And so it can call flip light with that index. And actually it already was. Awesome. Yeah. Hey, cool. Only re-rendering one thing at a time now. Yeah, that's awesome. Better. Thanks, Marcin. All right, let's look at the context one again. So this one, we have to wrap flip light. We've got to pass in that dependency array because it only depends on the setter. Cool. So that takes care of this, but the value is still being recreated. So we have to optimize this now. We have to wrap this in use Memo, which takes a function and returns some sort of value, memoized value. And again, it takes an argument that says, second argument is the dependencies. So this needs to be recreated when we've got lights or flip light. If either of these change, then we should regenerate this object. Otherwise, it'll be stale. And flip light is never going to change. So that's great. But lights will. So we are going to attempt to re-render these things. And then again, we've got to go and wrap these and use Memo. Keep saying use Memo. React.memo. Great that there's two functions that do very similar things. And use Memo needs to be imported. And I think we might end up with an optimized context here. We'll see. Let's see. So when we click on context at first, it renders everything. Figure that out. Flip one room. Nope. It renders all rooms. What's up with that? Oh, right. No, this is the problem, I guess, because we have this context here. Because this component calls useContext, it's sort of this is inside the use memo or inside the React memo, right? So it's React is going to call this thing regardless of what React Memo says, to give it a chance to re-render. And that's trickier. So yeah, I don't know. I guess in this case you could make a wrapper component. You could create a like higher order component for the context, which is honestly like that's kind of what Redux does. Like that's what Connect is. It's a higher order component, takes a component and returns an optimized one. You can make one of those for context. Call it like with room or something. I don't know. And this is a function that takes some arguments. I don't know if we need to pass any arguments. And returns a component. So it's going to return. Well, I guess it takes the component, huh? Connect takes arguments, returns the thing, takes a component. Might be messing this up. Render that component. I feel like we need to pass props along here. Returns a component that takes props. We get props here. Pass the props along. Haven't had to write a higher order component in a while. I think that might be right. We'll see. So again, we need to memoize it. So it needs to pull the context stuff up to here and like pass these in as props. And then this can get both of those things. But instead of wrapping it in React Memo, we wrap it in with room. And I think I got this function signature wrong because I think this is going to blow up. We click on this one. Broken. Yeah. What do we need to do here? We need a with room. Let's connect to. Takes arguments. Which in this case really is nothing. We can make it a function that takes a component. Oh, maybe I just have to flip this around. Takes a component and returns a thing that takes props and renders this stuff out, maybe. That's better. Now, is it optimized? No. Because we're not memoizing anywhere. So this is being, yeah, okay, so maybe with room React Memo. Maybe? I don't know. Going off the rails here. Okay. Nope. Still no good. So we're wrapping this memoized thing that gets, this actually seems like it should work because this is going to render every time. But what we want to do is short circuit that render and say like, okay, only re-render this component if the props are different. And it feels like this should do that, but it's interesting that it's not. Huh. I don't know. Anyone have any ideas? This is a weird one. Lights are different. Yeah, the whole lights array is different. Yeah, you're right. Lights is different from last time. So we need to pass the individual light, huh? Yeah. So then we need the index here, don't we? So we can pass like, we don't want to pass lights. We want to pass is lit here, ideally. If we can pass is lit here instead of lights, that's good. But well, that's okay because we are passing an index into room, so that means our wrapper thing will have that, right? This is going to get props like index and the rest of the props, and then we can pass is lit. I guess we actually need lights too. At that point, why bother, right? Pass the index down. Pass index is lit and flip light. Cool. Yeah, we can ignore the rest of the props. I think. Oh yeah. No. That's coming from there. Try here. Hey. Works now. Yeah. Nice. All right, so they're all optimized. Props and state works good. Context works. Redux worked out of the box. But yeah. So context versus Redux. I think if you have a small amount of state and small amount of state that doesn't change very often, context can be good for that. Like if you've got like currently logged in user, current theme, language, that kind of stuff, like app-wide stuff that isn't going to change very often, context is good for that. I think if you have more complex state, like if you want to have like some large object that's keep like caching data and like has multiple different things in it that can all change at different times and maybe change often, optimizing that by hand with context is going to be kind of a pain. And as you saw, so something like Redux or MobX or some other state management solution is probably a good idea if you have complex state. So yeah, the catch is context is great for simple stuff. I think context, like it avoids a whole mess of like setup and stuff, although it is kind of getting easier with Redux Starter Kit. But it avoids all this stuff in favor of just like giving you kind of the raw tools that you need to pass data around, but it makes the optimizations harder. And the optimizations really are the catch, I think. I think as like the number of contexts grows, and if you try to create a context, like a single context provider that has really complex state in it, even if you're using useReducer or something, like you're still going to have this problem of if the data changes, stuff is going to re-render, and you'll have to do some work to avoid that. Yeah, real app examples. Facebook. Yep. Although Facebook, I think, actually uses Relay. I don't think they use Redux. Relay is a GraphQL caching layer thing, like GraphQL library plus caching layer. Yeah, I think trying to think, like if you have you've got like data that you need to retain between routes, I think Redux is good for that because it's like it's top level data that needs to be disseminated across the app, but it's more complex than just like a single value. It's got, you've got data and loading and error states and all that kind of stuff. You're trying to kind of cache like a master detail view kind of thing, stuff like that. I think Redux comes in handy, and it's all kind of a balancing act. I mean, you can do it with context, it'll work, and React is pretty fast. It's not like I think like I've shown optimizing this little tiny app here. I wouldn't spend time optimizing something with 3 components in it. Like if your app is small, it's not even going to be like, it's not even going to be slow to re-render it often. So it all depends, it all depends on how big the app is, how complex the data is. But larger, more complex starts to be like, hey, maybe we should use Redux or something. Smaller, simpler, context is good. Yeah. So I think that's about all the time we've got for today. Thanks everyone for stopping by. This has been great. I'm probably gonna do another. I'm gonna do more live streams this week. So probably another one tomorrow around the same time. I think every day this week actually. So keep an eye. If you're here, you're probably on my mailing list. If not, davesedia.com/newsletter. But I'll be sending out emails with links to the live streams each day. And cool. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. Bye.